Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of Welcome back to my fourth video on Halloween-themed book reviews. Now, it is finally starting to feel like October down here in Mississippi. This past week, we've had gloomy days, we've had rainy days, and the temperatures have gotten cooler. And because of this, it's actually made me turn on my heater, which I'm that weird person who loves the smell of a heater turning on for the first time of the year. And you know what I mean with this. It's that kind of burnt, dusty smell, but also it just feels like it's welcoming in the season. Now, aside from that, quick little update on my fur babies. Sally is still doing all right. She really still has not been able to use the litter box. We've tried a few different techniques, and the vet said that if she hasn't done anything by Monday, to bring her back on Monday. But May has been neutered, and he is doing well, so that's good. And Jack has his little playmates back, which I don't believe you've ever seen Jack on these videos, because he's one of those big lazy cats who like to just be left alone unless it's one of the other cats playing with him. So that's what's going on in my world. Now, if you remember correctly, I still have not received a pumpkin spice latte, and personally, I no longer care to receive one, because if you have been watching the last few videos, you know that things like this crap has gone down. Well, what are you doing just standing there? Let me have it. Okay, I wish for a pumpkin spice. Put the pumpkin spice latte on the ground and step away. I said put it on! So, Carrie has stepped away again, and I swear to God, if he returns with a pumpkin spice latte, shit's gonna get real. This weekend, I'm reviewing Hallows Eve by Sarrantonio, and this is the direct sequel to Halloween, which I reviewed last week. Now, if you haven't read this series before, you really have got to read it in order. And this is not something that I expected with this series. And the reason why I say that is because with the first book, it felt so scattered. It felt like Sarrantonio did not really have a main character, which, I mean, I still liked the book, but it just seemed like he was all over the place. It seemed like he had introduced so many people, I had no idea where this was going or who a main character was, and when I finished it, I just kind of felt like there were no main characters except the villain, which was Sam Hain. But by starting the second book and then finishing it, I really saw the direction that he's taking this in, and also it allowed me to realize that a few of the side characters from part one were main characters in part two. And because of the small snippets of background he provided those side characters in the first book, it really built onto their strengths and their development for the sequel. Now, with him zoning in the way he did with this book, it really allowed me to see his full potential, especially with genre bending, world building, and story structure. Unfortunately, I don't have a print copy of this, but it is available on ebook, audio, and print. I just decided to opt out for the ebook version. So I hope you can see that cover on my e-reader. But with Hallows Eve by Sarrantonio, it takes place 1 year after the first book ended, and it introduces a new character named Corey Fader, who is this famous photographer that has been away from Orangefield for the last little bit. And with him, he has this strange urge to return to his hometown, and he doesn't even understand why. But he does follow that urge, and he returns to Orangefield, and even though his homecoming should be filled with joy and open arms and just all of these moments of happiness, his return is anything but. And the reason why is because when he was a kid, his mother was murdered in front of him, and the killer came up to him afterwards and said, "You have got to leave Orangefield and never return," which is exactly what he did. That is, of course, until now when he has that strange urge to return. So the book follows what he is now doing, having been returned to his childhood home, and he is connecting with people from his past, such as he connects with Kathy Marks, who was a side character in the first book, and he also has some altercations with Detective Grant, which Grant feels that Corey is guilty of murdering his mom, but of course, as we know, Grant is wrong. Corey did not do that. So, as storylines and conflicts begin to merge together, of course, Sam Hain returns into plot, and he returns with his tricks, his manipulations, and his intent to merge our world with his world. Which, if that was to happen, Earth as we know it would be no more, because with his world being like the netherworld and everything, all of these ghostly, ghoulish, demonic things would just bleed over into our own reality. And so with this time, he decides to use Corey and a neighbor girl named Reggie as pawns in his evil scheme to end the world as we know it. Now, with this, we do have Corey, who joins hands with Reggie, and even Detective Grant gets in on it. But we have another character who is really a unique character. And this is going to be a possessed scarecrow named John. And once they all join forces, it becomes nothing but this power fight between good versus evil. Since a possessed scarecrow is significant in Volume 2 and stands as a protector, I wanted to elaborate on the lore of scarecrows and how Sarrantonio utilized these superstitions and symbols for John. No matter where I searched, may it be online or by book, I continuously found that the scarecrow is a symbol of protection. Also, I discovered the scarecrow can represent death and fear, but at the same time, it can represent hope and prosperity. From the perspective of death and fear, a garden without a scarecrow might result in poor crops. Of course, this is because without the scarecrow, animals might eat all of one's produce, and in the olden days, if families didn't have a successful crop, they might suffer starvation throughout the winter. From a hope and prosperity stance, the scarecrow granted crops the opportunity to grow by scaring away hungry animals. In turn, this would allow a successful garden that could grant enough food for families throughout the winter. Aside from what I felt related to Hallows Eve, culture and symbolism varies in the scarecrow. And among the scarecrow's diversity, one gruesome concept caught my attention. In the book Halloween by Silver Ravenwolf, the author cites John Holland Smith's The Death of Classical Paganism, where the original scarecrow was a human sacrificed to the crops to guarantee a bountiful harvest. Also, in other searches, I discovered some magic practitioners use the scarecrow to keep trespassers off of their property. Supposedly, this is done by placing hematite or plants like honeysuckle or thistle inside of its body. Fun facts. In the last video I did on Sarrantonio, I covered the genres that he contributed to the most. But since then, I was able to come across an interview that Robert McCammon gave him back in the early 90s. And in this interview, Sarrantonio said that he constructed comedic anthologies as well. But unfortunately, in one anthology that he is speaking of, Bill Cosby and Woody Allen were contributors to that book. So, moving on away from that. Besides him constructing anthologies, he also worked at Doubleday, and this is where he was an editor, and he had the opportunity to meet people like Jackie Onassis and also Isaac Asimov, which by him meeting Isaac Asimov, this resulted in his first printed story in Isaac Asimov's magazine, which at this time he was writing nothing but sci-fi. So, with that covered, it is now time to move on to the spoiler section of this video. Pretty much, this is where I'm going to discuss some of my favorite scenes and some character development, where if you haven't read this book, you might want to skip this because I'm going to ruin some parts of it for you. So you have 17 seconds to click away, and to do this, you would need to scroll down to the comments section of this video. You'll see that I have a comment pinned at the top, and in this, there will be a timestamp where if you were to click on that, it will direct you away from this segment and to the Thoughts chapter. So once again, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So ready, set, go. Now that everyone has had a chance to click away, I want to talk about some of my favorite scenes. And the first one I want to address is completely unsettling. It's simple, but it's effective. And if I were the parent who this little girl was talking to, seriously, I would have sneaked a turd out of my butt. I really would have. I would have had to excuse myself, just run to the bathroom, take care of business, and then I would have come back and saged the hell out of that house. Now, the thing is, you have Regina, and she has been having some interactions with the spirit world. And in this case, she has been having some disturbances go on in her bedroom, and it's in regards to these 4 invisible playmates, which she finally starts to open up to her mom about the playmates. And in this moment that I'm speaking of, she's talking to her mom, and she says there's 4 playmates, and truth be it, these just simply kind of seem like friendly, playful ghosts until she gets to the last playmate, which we have, among them, we have Andy, who is this tall entity, and then there's the twins, which are Harry and Mary, but the final one is named Judith. And the creepy thing about Judith is, only half of her is human. The other half of her is donkey. And I'm like thinking to myself, okay, so this bitch has got the legs of a donkey and the upper half of a human. Alright, I don't think she ever existed in human form. And so, with that said and done, and how she's hanging around the other 3, I'm thinking guilty by association. Now, she says that Andy is tall. Alright, well, what if he's a giant? What if he's like this monstrous, just deformed, demonic giant? What if she is encountering that, and the best way she can describe it is he's tall? And then also, like, the twins, Harry and Mary. Oh, this, no. The thing is, creepy twins, especially dead creepy twins, if The Shining taught us anything, you stay the hell away from them. Now, with this, I'm kind of wondering, maybe they're like imps or something, or like demons trying to appear as children. And the thing is, up until the moment that we discover that Judith is half-assed, I was cool with it. But that really opened up a door. And the thing is, it's never really elaborated further. It's just put there just to gnaw at your mind and to creep you out. That's all it is. Now, another moment, and this is so epic. It's really not creepy, but it's totally badass. At the end of this book, there's a scene where you have Reggie, Detective Grant, and Corey, who have all taken refuge inside of a house belonging to a friend who recently passed away of Detective Grant's. And the friend's name is Raleigh, by the way. He used to work for law enforcement as well, but he gets killed early on in the book. So anyway, you have where Detective Grant and Corey and Reggie have taken refuge in Riley's house, and they're trying to survive the night. They're trying to figure out what they need to do next. And while they're in there, there's this pumpkin patch across from them. And the thing is, they're looking out through the windows and stuff, and the pumpkins in this patch start to move, and they start to form, and they morph and shift, and they become this army of pumpkin men, and the house gets invaded by them. And the way that this is set up, it reminded me of Night of the Living Dead, and I had not been so deeply invested in a home invasion scene probably since that time, especially when it regards creatures. Now, here's the thing. I don't care if it is a big crowd or a posse or just whatever you want to call it, mass quantities of anything. May it be zombies, may it be hornets, may it be people, may it be pumpkin men, or even Jehovah's Witnesses. These all scare the hell out of me. Mass quantities of anything is creepy as hell. And the thing that I really enjoyed about this is Sarrantonio creates a very unique monster, and then he has that monster invade, and it's a scene that doesn't let up. It's completely white knuckle. It is just can't oh it was something that pushed my adrenaline. It really did. And there were a few other scenes in the book that I really enjoyed as well, but if I had to narrow it down to 2 scenes, it would totally be the ones that I just mentioned. As I mentioned, the character development in Hallows Eve is so much better than the character development in Halloween. And because of this, I got some wiggle room to bitch about characters, which I'm going to pick on Detective Grant because he was a total dipshit here. And the thing is, it's kind of saddening because the way that he's presented in Halloween, he seems like a pretty intelligent man, and he seems like a good man at that. But here we see that old dipshit has had some issues going on for a little bit, and technically they really can't be excused because he just needs to learn when to give up the ghost. But this is more so in regards to a flashback scene that establishes why Grant is just out to get Corey. Now, what happens in this scene is you discover that Corey and Kathy were high school sweethearts. They met because they were in a dark place and they thought that they could help one another. Well, while this is all going on and stuff, you got Corey who's starting to have all this poltergeist activity crap that's going down at his house, and things are getting worse, and he doesn't want to involve Kathy in this, so he pushes her away. Well, Kathy can't take the rejection because she really has nothing to cling on to. Pretty much Corey is her world. And so when she gets rejected like that, she runs off into the woods and tries to hang herself. Well, Corey gets the gut instinct that he needs to go see what's going on, and he finds her at the right time and rescues her. Well, at this time, you have where Riley and a detective dipshit here, Grant, they are in the woods and they see what's going on. Now, Riley is intelligent enough to be able to say, hey, Corey is trying to save this girl, where Grant over here is like, oh no, he's trying to kill her, he's trying to hang her. Thank God there was at least someone on scene that knew what was going on and could determine common sense from stupidity. And, you know, thankfully, because of Riley, you have Detective Grant who kind of lays off because he respects Riley and everything. But as the story progresses, we get to the scene where Corey's mother has been murdered. And Grant shows up, and he's sure as shit that Corey is guilty of matricide. Now, here's where things really get bad. Okay, so Corey at this time is wheelchair bound. And he is also on the 2nd level of his home. So he's up there, his mom is dead at the base of the staircase, she's been stabbed to death, and Corey has remained upstairs in his wheelchair. So, my thing is, Detective Grant, he really should have been more observant, he really should have been more intelligent about this, and truth be it, he should have just let bygones be bygones and focus on this circumstance versus him still thinking that Corey was guilty for trying to hang Kathy and just trying to find some dirt to get him behind bars. So my thing is, alright, Corey's on the 2nd level of the home, he's in a wheelchair, his mom has been stabbed to death at the base of the staircase, and also the autopsy and stuff like that shows that she did not fall down the staircase. She was stabbed on the lower level. And my thing is, all right, if evidence is there, Detective Grant, why can't you accept it? I mean, even Corey has been excused from this crime in court because there's no evidence to prove that he murdered his mother and that he was incapable of doing so. And so, if the courts can see this is just simply the wrong person, wrong place, wrong time, he's innocent, why can't Detective Grant? But no, he holds this for the next 10 years or so, and truth be it takes a damned possessed scarecrow to have a come to Jesus meeting with Detective Grant and bring him down from the mountain. So that's my rant about Detective Grant. Now, in other news, I would like to also address that with Corey, he is a very lovable character. He seems like he's a very charismatic character. I don't know why I get the idea that he's charismatic, but he kind of seems like he might be hot. But anyway, you have Corey, and this is where the subject of being a martyr comes into play, because Corey becomes a martyr for the greater good of our world. And I kind of saw this coming, but I didn't want to believe it would actually happen. And everything goes down with him and Samhain in what's known as the way station of the spirit world. And I really liked how this scene was set up and described and everything, and how open it was to allow your mind to elaborate more. But it was so sad when he sacrificed himself for the greater good, and it was really bittersweet, because the thing is, even though he died to help out the world, you do have where he's reunited with his mother again in the afterlife, and that was really a tender moment. Personally, I liked Hallows Eve a lot more than I did Halloween, and the reason why is because Sarrantonio finally zones in on just a few subjects. Now, comparing book 1 with book 2, I do see where it is necessary for them to be structured the way that they are. And the reason why I say this is, with book 1, you see what happens when Samhain affects an entire community, versus book 2, when you see how it is when Samhain affects just a few people and those individuals who are in those persons' lives. So I do feel that his style of this trilogy is necessary up to this point at least, and I really do have to applaud how he was able to transition part 1 to part 2 and be able to show the diversity in structure. Now, I want to also address his creativity here, because in the second book, he does mention about a way station, which is a spiritual way station. And even though I knew that Sarrantonio was good at world building, because in book 1, he really made me want to become a part of Orangefield, even though all this horrible stuff happened there, it still felt like a town where it was October year round and they just really embraced the season, and it made me want to be there. Now, with this book, as he's describing the way station, it's done in a sense where he touches on it. He doesn't elaborate on it too deeply, but from what I'm able to tell about the world that he built there, is it feels like a limbo where all of these spiritual and monstrous things have been hanging out in the afterlife. Now, it doesn't feel like it's hell, but he paints it out as literally like this afterlife waiting room. And so it was really cool to see that, because he really does blend genres here, and he also does some pretty decent world building. So I have to applaud him for this. Now, as far as commentary goes, we do still have the subjects of suicide and depression that continue on in this book. But also another subject comes into play, which is the subject of being a martyr. And I wish I could elaborate on that a little bit more, but if I did, it would ruin parts of the book. And I had also touched on this in the spoiler section, so I'm not going to do it again here. Now, as far as symbolism goes, even though the first book might have had symbolism in it, it just felt too scattered for me to be able to pick that apart. Now, in the second book, with it being more focused, I was able to tell that the character John, which is the possessed scarecrow, really stood as a great symbol. And this is going back to what I had kind of briefly touched on in the story behind the story segment. Now, with scarecrows, as I had mentioned, they are symbols of protection. And also at the same time, they can represent fear and death, and also hope and prosperity. Now, in John's case, he's not residing over a vegetable garden. He's not residing over produce of any type. So he's not protecting any sort of food. But what he is protecting and trying to give hope for is of course Corey and Reggie. And pretty much it's by his guidance that he is able to allow hope and preservation and prosperity to prevail. But also at the same time, he does represent death and fear because he is from that other realm where death resides. And so it was really interesting to see how this character of John was removed from the gardens and was standing protection over humans versus food. So that was really awesome. Would I recommend this book? Totally. I would totally do it because I absolutely adored it. It was so much better than the first book. And also, if you've read the first book and you just don't know how to feel about it, I wouldn't judge the series until after I read this book. Now, if you have read book 1 and 2 and you don't know if you want to progress to book 3 or not, I would progress because it does tie up the loose ends. But if you just kind of feel like at this point you've been reading it just to read it and you're just trying to wait until something better comes along, then you might want to skip out on part 3, because if the series hasn't grabbed you by this point, it's not going to. But I do really have to suggest this book to lovers of horror and also dark fantasy, because he does blend dark fantasy as well. But more so, he's able to continue making the reader feel like it's Halloween. And that's the most important aspect of this series, especially at this time of year. Because if you're looking for something that's going to make you feel like the season, this series is it. Okay, so on to the questions. My first question is, what horror book would you recommend where the sequel is better than its predecessor? Also, if you have read Halloween, what did you think about its sequel compared to that particular title? Oh, hell no. 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 This shit ain't going down. You see this? Hand it over. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Now step. What the hell? What the hell is wrong with this? What did you do?
I thought the milk would still be good.
What the hell do you mean you thought it would still be good? When did it expire?
Last month.
I swear I am living in hell. And the final question is, have you attempted to contact the spirit world on Halloween night, and was it a success or a failure? Personally, for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been conducting seances in my home on Halloween night, and they have all been successful. Now, these aren't things that I offer up to the general public. These are sessions that I only keep between myself and those who I'm close with. These are individuals who come over who I know will respect the circumstance, they'll respect the spirit world, and also they need closure. And because of how intimate and private these sessions are, I'm not going to elaborate on what happens in these sessions. But I will say this. If you are wanting to conduct your own seance, you need to do research first. You need to stick with names that you know will be respectful of the ceremony. And also at the same time, you need to only contact people who have passed away that either you or your members have known. So don't try to go out there and contact Elvis or something like that. Stick to people who have passed away that you personally knew. Now, another thing you need to do is be sure to protect yourself by prayer, and also protect the seance area by prayer. And just also be respectful and thankful to whatever spirit is available to speak with you that evening. So that's my advice on conducting a seance. And since we have nothing left to talk about with the book or questions, it's now time that I thank Alicia Graves and Joseph Baylott for contributing to my Patreon account. I really appreciate your donations because it's helped with props. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon as well, just go to the description section of this video and you'll see a link to my Patreon page. And for $5 a month, I'll mention your name at the end of each video in the future. And again, this will go to advertising and also props. Now, I do also want to extend this welcome and say if you would like to connect with me on social media like Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all of those links are available in the description section of this video as well. And also, I normally don't do this, but for this series, since it is so focused on suicide and depression, I'm also including information for suicide prevention hotlines. So if you are in need of that, just refer to the description section. That information is also available. So until we meet again, please hit subscribe. Please, please, please subscribe. And also be sure to click that notifications bell so when I do a new video, you will be notified. And until we meet again, I hope everyone has sweet nightmares and happy Halloween.